So you have your references, and now you want to insert them into your assignment. So let's say a few things about how to actually do that. Here's your standard essay format. You have your introduction, you have your body, and then your conclusion, and then your reference list. So it says references here. This also applies to if you're writing a research report with an introduction, methods, results, and discussion. That also has a reference list. In both of those cases, you have the main part, which is the body of the text, and then you have the reference list. You have citations, there are in-text citations that go in the body, and then you also have your in-text references that go in the reference list. Now keep in mind that whenever you have a citation in the body of the text, there needs to be a corresponding, so there also needs to be a reference for that citation in the reference list. So if I have 5 unique citations in my body of the text, I need to have 5 references in my reference list. Okay? Now moving on. There's 2 types of in-text citations. First of all, we'll talk about what's called parenthetical citations. This just means inside of brackets. And this is used in a situation where you're not using the citation as a subject or as an element of your sentence. So an example of this is that if in my essay, I said something like, some studies show that cats are favored more often than dogs, I'm actually just making a claim and I'm putting that reference at the end of that sentence to give some credibility or to cite or to show the source of where I got that the information for that claim. Okay. Now, in comparison to that, you have narrative in-text citations, and that's when you're referring directly to the reference or the citation rather in your sentence. By the way, you might have noticed in this guide, and like generally speaking, when we talk about references, citations and references, we kind of use them interchangeably. They actually do have distinct differences, but really the difference between citations and references really isn't that important in terms of what I've seen. So yeah, I do, just in case there might be a bit of confusion. But anyway, if you are referring directly to a citation in your assignment, you want to use a narrative style of in-text citation. So if you write something like this, according to Watson, cats are favored more often than dogs. Well, the citation, the person who wrote this, Watson, that's his surname, Watson is actually part of the sentence. So I'm referring it directly in the sentence, it's a subject in the sentence. So that means that it needs to be outside of brackets. Now you notice that the year in both of these examples, in both parenthetical and narrative, the year is always inside of brackets. It's just the surname that is either inside brackets or outside of brackets. Okay, either of these is acceptable. Just use the one that's appropriate. I often see students use parenthetical even though they're referring to it in the sentence, so they're using parenthetical when they should be using narrative. That's a common mistake. So just keep an eye out for that, because yeah, you might lose marks for this. Now, the kind of in-text citation you do depends also on the number of authors you have. So I'm not going to go into all the detail here, but just understand that once you start having more than one author and it's parenthetical, then you need to start using this thing here, this symbol here called an ampersand. The ampersand only exists inside of brackets. If you have multiple authors or 2 authors or more outside of brackets, then you just type and instead of having the ampersand symbol. So the ampersand is special because it only likes to be in brackets. And then things also change between 3 and 5 authors and 6 authors. Okay. Again, I'm not going to go into heaps of detail about that. And generally speaking, you're not going to get penalized as much early on in your degree for making these distinctions here. So, just try to get the basics down at least. Let's say a few things about quotations. I noticed that a lot of undergraduate students, when I mark papers, they really like to use quotations. If you use quotations, you need to use quotation marks. Okay, obviously. Always use quotation marks if you're quoting. And if you don't know what a quotation is just copy and pasting something from someone else's work. Okay, so if you don't cite that, if you don't give a citation for that quotation, then that is regarded as plagiarism, usually. So for example, I want to quote this guy Watson from 2010. I want to quote him, so I put this in quotation marks. Cats are really cool, that's the quote. and the surname, the year. So this is just another parenthetical citation, but you also need to include the page number. So if you're using APA, so page number has to be there. Okay, this is also acceptable as well as far as I know, but I don't see it. It's not as common. It also doesn't look as nice. You say Watson 2010, cats are really cool, and then give the page number at the end of that. Okay, my recommendation, and again, this is based on what I've seen from undergraduates, is that you should try to keep quotations to a minimum, because quotations, normally they're not even necessary. Normally you can just paraphrase, so put it into your own words. And I see, often in less or not as good assignments, and I see from first-year students, sometimes rely heavily on quotations, which again, you shouldn't do. You should be writing your own work. Okay, now, sorry, you can't see it behind me, but this is the reference list. And now we're going to talk about end text references that go in your reference list at the end of your assignment. So if you have a journal article, and this is the kind of thing, I'm going to quickly go through this, but this kind of information here about like how to, where to put the different things in your end text reference list, this is all available on different kinds of sources. There's probably people out there that are explaining this, better than I am right now, but I'll give you a quick rundown, and I'll just move myself down here to do this. Okay. So if you're using a journal article, there's different kinds of references, depending on what kind of source you're using. So if you're referencing a journal article, you do it like this. You have your author, author A, author B, and it's different if you have more authors as well, but the separator between the second to last author and the last author is always separated by an ampersand. You have the initials that come after. So remember, in-text references, in-text citations don't have references. They don't have initials, but they always have surnames, whereas at the in-text or end-text references, you always include the initials. Okay? Then you include the year, the article. You only capitalize the first letter of the title of the article. And then you name the periodical, so that's the name of the journal. And then the volume number, and then the issue. Now, and another part of this series, I'm going to talk about how this can be made a bit easier with some apps. But it's good that you know this if you know this like general format. Anyway, you also include the page numbers. So if you have a journal, there's heaps of different articles within the same journal volume. So you also need to specify which numbers are occupied by the journal article you're using. And then also the DOI. And I don't remember when DOI started. I think it's after 2008. But so citations before that generally don't have DOIs as a digital identification number. But if it's a more recent article, it's always going to have that DOI, and you need to include your DOI. Okay? Anything else I need to say here? Yeah, there's just all these kinds of fiddly things, like where you put this comma in this period. Again, I don't think it's useful for me to really talk about that in detail right now, but you will need to be familiar with it at some point. So actually, one thing I'll do right now is I will quickly show you. This is an article. This is that Modern Lifespan Perspective article. And normally when you open up the PDF, you can see all the information you need right here. So for example, this developmental psychology, if you've looked at enough articles, you'll know that that is the journal name, the name of the journal in which this was published. It's also given the year here and the volume number and the number. Okay? So these are the numbers that you use as well in your end text citation. These are the page numbers here. So all of it's kind of given to you. We know that the last name in this guy is Baltz, and then his two initials are P and B. Okay, this is the title of the article. But remember, when you put it in your end text citation, you only capitalize this first letter here, and then everything else is not capitalized. I know, there's a lot of things to remember. I don't make the rules. I think that's all we need. This is a really old article, so there's no DOI as far as I can see. They didn't have DOIs in 1987, but in more recent articles, you'll see those DOIs. Okay, so we've done the journal article. Let's move on to the other really common citation that you'll be doing is a book. So a book is very similar. You have your authors here. So I'll use this one as an example. This one here, developmental psychology, or sorry, lifespan human development. There's actually 3 authors here, Siegelman, Ryder, and George Walker. The copyright year, just like we had before, the title of the book. You also include the edition number. So in this case, this would be 2nd edition. The publisher, and then the DOI or URL. Okay, this last part isn't as important for books, but if you want to be super thorough, you can include that as well. Now, this is another thing I've talked about, and usually, I mentioned how web pages usually aren't scholarly sources, but quite often you still want to reference web pages, especially if you talk about government things. A lot of government reports are hosted online and you can only access them through web pages, so they might actually be scholarly sources in some cases. But in any case, a lot of undergraduate assignments require you to cite websites. So this is how you cite websites. You have your author A, author B. A lot of websites don't have authors. So if you can't see one, just give the name of the organization. So if it was an APA or Wikipedia article, although you shouldn't be citing Wikipedia articles usually, then you would put Wikipedia here instead of the author names. Then you give the name. If you can't see a date on the website, just put ND, that means no date. The title of the web page, that should be pretty easy. The name of the organization. Okay. If the organization is the same as the author, then you actually don't need to include both. You just include this. Okay, and then you just leave this blank. And then the URL, so that's the actual address. You just copy that from the address bar. Okay, cool. So, this is a lot of citations usually require web pages, especially because, in this day and age, most of their information we get is from online as well. Now, let's say a few more things about formatting, and I got Grumpy Baby up here because this is the face that people make when I get to this stage. I know, again, there's like all these little rules, but again, this is, at least according to the University of Auckland, these are the things you need to do to your reference list to make it up to standard. Otherwise, again, you'll lose points. So I'll give you an example of how to do this with my own work. So just looking at, we have, it should be a separate page at the end of your assignment. It needs to be 1.5 spacing in alphabetical order and also hanging indentation. So I'll teach you how to do all of those. I'll use my example from, this is a literature review that I've done, some citations here. So yeah, so let me just move myself back up here. And I'll make this a bit bigger. Okay, so I've got all these citations, but it hasn't been formatted properly. I have put it on a separate page though. Okay, so this is the body of my text. It's not finished yet, but the conclusion would normally be here, and then on the separate page you'd have references. Okay, so what I would do, oh, by the way, you probably won't see these. Don't get freaked out by these things. These are just numbers. You normally need to do this if you're preparing a manuscript. But anyway, what I want to do is make this, I want to properly format this, because if I just submitted this as an assignment like this, then I'd lose marks because this doesn't look correct. So what I can do is I can highlight all of these. Oops. So click and drag. And first of all, I want to make this alphabetical. And I'll just quickly show you. I've got my magnifying glass up here. If I go up here, where is it? I believe is it review? Ah, here we go. So this thing here. So what this does is this will sort everything you have. So if you put everything in a separate row, so I've got, this is the first author, Alfonso is the second author, and then Andrews and Brenner and so on and so forth. This is actually already in alphabetical order, but imagine that it's not. Then what I can do is I can click that button that we clicked on before, so it's under home. And then after I go from home, I go to the right of that, I click sort here. So once I've got sort open here, I can just sort by paragraphs and press OK. and it's sorting everything for me. So it's already in alphabetical order. Okay. In this case, it actually sorted references, which is going to be, it should be here. But you know, the reference title, this should be at the top. So that was a mistake. Anyway, so that's how you make everything alphabetical. The easiest way to do it, because you don't have to do it manually. Please don't do it manually. That's a waste of time. And then I want to make this 1.5 spacing. The way that I do that, I've got everything highlighted, and then I go up here. So it's this symbol here. Click on that, and I go down to 1.5 spacing. So 1.5 spacing here. Boom. Done. It just puts more spaces between the references, the lines in the reference list. And then I also want to do what's called hanging text. What is hanging text? It just means that the first line of each reference is hanging a bit, and then the rest of the reference is like this. So I'll show you how to do that. You go up here where it says paragraph. This is in Microsoft Word, by the way, in case it wasn't obvious. So I recommend, I think there's ways to do this in Google Docs, but I prefer to do this in Word. In Word, because Word actually does have more capabilities. It's just not hosted online, usually. So anyway, I'm gonna go up here to paragraphs and then click on this little arrow here. I'm gonna click on this little guy over here, and then it's going to have these options here. So again, just in case you can't see it, it's a closer look. There's different things here. You wanna go to where it says indentation, and then to the right of that, it says special. So indentation here, to the right of that, it says special. Click on that and then say hanging. It should say hanging here, and then press OK. Okay, now this is actually, that's a bit, looks a bit weird because I probably shouldn't have highlighted this. So let me just try that again, highlighting everything else. Let's try that again. Special hanging. And there we go. So everything is kind of hanging in that way that I was talking to you about. And again, that just makes it much more readable and in accordance with the assignment guidelines that you've been given.